combined adult classes. Hopefully you got some refreshments, some bagels and fruits and coffee, and that is courtesy of Jane Levy this morning, so let's give her a round of applause. Also, as a reminder, if you haven't already done so, please pick up your Sunday school folder. I think they were sitting out on that table closest to the bagel, so grab your bagel, grab your Sunday school folder, check attendance, and you can just leave them on that table when you get done. Hopefully you've been able to attend several of these. We're looking at the different world religions. Today we are going to be learning about Islam, and I'll go ahead and turn it over to our guest lecturer this summer, Dr. Hobby. Welcome.
Today I am Mohammed Hobby, so I'll do my best to present myself as a Muslim, but I find myself slipping out of character every now and then, and the Christian side of me can't help but show itself. So watch out. If you're not sure which I am, yell and say, "Who are you?" Does everybody have an outline? Okay, good. Let's begin with prayer. Dear God, we're grateful for your many blessings and all that you have given us. Help us to remember all that you've done for us. Help us to remember those things that stand as obstacles between us and you. Help us to always remember, remember, remember. Because it's in remembering that we truly know who you are. In your Son's name we pray. Amen. As I was preparing this presentation today, I thought, well, I could tell them all the tenets of Islam and what Islam believes, but it struck me that that's not very helpful sometimes. And so if you look at the outline, you'll see that I took a bold move, and I decided the thing to talk about most of all is this. What is it that Christians feel uncomfortable about when they think about Islam? What is it that they are fearful of sometimes? What is it that they don't like? How does all this work together? And so I thought, rather than just starting off and talking about the tenets of Islamic belief, which I hope we can do, it's on the list, but I would rather deal with the problems that Islam presents to Christians and to Americans and see what you think, or whether you think there are other issues. So I started considering this, and it struck me that there were probably three areas that perhaps needed to be looked at. One was the American fear of terrorism, and it's certainly not just an American fear, but it's one that you hear a lot about, Islamic terrorism. And that's related to how Americans and some people elsewhere understand the Islamic view toward violence, that somehow Islam is a more militant religion. So that was two things, terrorism and underlying violence. And then the third thing was treatment of women. I think we hear a lot about that, and so I'd like to look at those three issues first, and then we can go on and talk about other things as we progress. Everybody okay with that?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. So make sure you're there. On the outline, I say the great irony. And it is a great irony. The religion that is closest to Christianity in geography, because Islam and Christianity share many borders, but also in standard beliefs, the two religions that are actually have more in common than any of the religions we've talked about, certainly more than Hinduism and Buddhism, perhaps more than Judaism. I want to talk about that a little bit too, but isn't it an irony that the religion that is most like Christianity in so many ways is the one that we have the most problem with? Well, of course, being neighbors isn't a great help sometimes, you know that. There was a report issued this weekend that said 50% of all murders and violent acts against women are committed by their partners. It's huge, and if you go and talk to any policeman, they'll say, you know, the most dangerous thing I have to do, domestic unrest. That's a dangerous place to have to go. Go into a home where people are yelling and have pulled guns. It's not easy. And so maybe part of the problem is that we've been too close to each other. But I don't buy that necessarily. I don't think that's a particularly good answer. So we've got to try to figure out, where did all this terrorism come from and what is going on with it today? Most of the terrorism is modern. Did you know that? And it goes back about exactly 100 years. During World War I, nearly all of the Holy Land and Palestine were controlled by Turkey. And of course, Turkey fought with the Central Powers in World War I. And so when Turkey was defeated, all the lands that Turkey held were up for grabs. How many of you all watched or seen the movie Lawrence of Arabia? Did you get real thirsty about 20 minutes into it? Unusually hard to know. Well, Lawrence fought with the Arabs against Turkey, basically in the area of the Holy Land. And in 1919, when the peace conference met at Versailles, Lawrence, who was an Englishman, took the Arab delegation there, hoping that they would get their own country. And that never happened. You know, the tragedy of Versailles is it was just politics like it used to be. And what happened was the great powers, Britain, France, the United States, basically divided up that territory. They called it protectorates. But they basically said England will have basically the area that we call Jerusalem, or the Holy Land, to Christians and to Muslims. France controlled Lebanon and that area up there. And the United States didn't have any protectorates there, had interests, but they were basically in other parts of the world. And so the refusal of the Arabs to have their own government after the war led to real problems. And unfortunately, when they divided up the territory, they drew maps in Paris, way far away from the Holy Land, and said, we will call this nation Iraq. And we will call this nation Iran. And they basically set up nations where there weren't any nations. And so they overlooked all the ethnic groups that were in the Middle East. And you know, an artificial country isn't going to hold together very well, as we've seen in both Iraq and to a certain extent in Iran. They fall apart. Syria is another example. They fall apart pretty closely. So basically, you had an unsettled situation during this time, and people that were very unhappy about the way they were being governed. They didn't like Western ideas particularly. Have you ever heard the phrase Coca-colonialism? Coca-colonialism is like McDonaldism. And so when you open these McDonald's stores or Burger King stores in countries that are just not used to that, and they see it as an infringement on their culture. And so you had this unrest going on that was basically played upon, in a way, by people that wanted independence. And I'll tell you a terrible fact that plagues Islam and every world religion. If you have no other organization around which you can organize yourself, you're going to go to religion. And so whenever there is a disenfranchised group or a group who feels oppressed, it's very easy for them to hide behind the skirts of religion, to use religion as a basis for their own radical agendas. Can you think of any examples of that in American culture or in other places around the world? Has Christianity ever been used like that?
But the Puritans.
Yep. The Puritans were very good, excellent. The Puritans were oppressed people, and they came over to this country, and they used their religion as the basis for a lot of problems that they had. And Puritanism basically played itself out because it was so much tied to other issues than just religious faith. Or you can come up 250 years and look at the church in the southern states after the Civil War. When the Yankees came, I say I'm a southern Muslim. When those Yankees came down, when those Yankees came into the South after the Civil War, there were no organizations except the church. And so it was not long before the old Southern customs and the whole old Southern way of doing things was absorbed into most of the Protestant churches in the South. And that's not, that's a danger to the church more than it is to beliefs. But certainly that's the tendency. And it also tends to promote a very rigid view of the religion, because it's in the rigidity of a religion that you can get people that are unhappy to come and say, I need something to really believe in. I don't want to hear the fine points. Just tell me something I can hold on to. And so, yes, thank you.
Was the Ku Klux Klan part of that?
Yeah.
Religion?
What was the symbol of the Ku Klux Klan? A cross. And they had Klan, I think there was a name for the Klan chaplain. And a lot of ministers, it's a sad story, were members of the Klan in its first manifestation in the 1870s and 1880s. And so thank you. That's a very good example of what can happen if you're not careful. Now, did the Klan ever represent Christianity? No. The Klan was kind of a fanatical offshoot that I think in a way expressed religious belief as a way of drawing more and more people to them. Okay, I'm going to stop there and see if the point I'm trying to make, bottom line, is that religions can sometimes be used by radical and fringe groups. We're going to look at some other examples of that in a minute, that cause the religion itself to be called into question. And maybe that's unfair. I don't know. You have to think about this. Do we uphold Christianity on its ideals, or do we uphold Christianity? Do you uphold? See, I'm slipping. Do you all stand by your religious beliefs on the basis of the ideal or the practical? That's a good question. It's a real problem for Christianity today, it seems to me, as an outsider. Any other questions? Thank you. Now, within Islam, there are two groups, basically, and I'm going to cover this really quickly. You've heard it in the news, Sunnis and Shiites. The Sunnis are a vast majority in Islam. About 85% of all people professing Islam are Sunnis. And the division between the two occurred shortly after Muhammad's death. And it was a battle over who was going to succeed him. The Sunnis believe that a council should get together and appoint a new leader without any concern about Muhammad's offspring. In other words, they did not want to say that we're going to hand down this religion through Muhammad's line. 85% of all Islam has held to that. 15% are called Shiites, and they believed that Muhammad's son and grandson and his relatives should basically control the religion. And this has been a division now since 600 AD. They comprise about 15% of all Muslims. They hold the majority in only two countries in the Middle East, Iran and Iraq. And so while most of the world is Sunni, these two countries are not. And a lot of the groups that come out of this, that develop into terrorism, have latched on to either one or the other group. Of course, all this was complicated by the fact that you have the nation of Israel being founded at the same time. And the real question I want to leave you with is this. How much do we blame terrorism on culture, and how much do we blame it on religion? And I'll tell you something. I can tell you this as a Christian as well as an Islamist. If you give me a generation of people who feel like they've been oppressed and misused and have no hope, I'll make radicals for you. It's not that hard to do. And I will tie them to my religion because that's the one thing that I have in common with them. So I want to look at this again real quickly. Where have we seen struggles that are basically about oppression and economic inequality turn into religious struggles? Yeah.
Ireland?
Yes. Northern Ireland is the great example. In Northern Ireland, it's Roman Catholic against Protestant. But the real issue, if you look at it, is economic. The Catholics have been held down in Northern Ireland for generations. And so when the opportunity comes to stand up and fight for our rights, they wrap themselves in Catholicism, just like Protestants wrap themselves in the Reformed Church of Ireland. What about in the United States, other than the KKK, because that's history? Have we seen
Malcolm X.
Malcolm X is an example of a heretical strand of Islam. It doesn't even begin to be true Islam, but it was a religion that nobody knew much about in America, they could latch on to. And thank you for mentioning Malcolm X. You know, he was a black Muslim. Until the year before he was killed, he went to Mecca. And he saw that there were no racial distinctions in Islam, that all he had been taught was wrong. And so all of this business about using religion as a basis for oppression, he suddenly realized wasn't right. Perhaps that's what got him killed. Have any of y'all heard of the group called the Branch Davidians? What religion were they connected with? Seventh-day Adventists. Now, do I think Seventh-day Adventists are like Branch Davidians? No. There are a lot of good people. I disagree with them who are Seventh-day Adventists. They're not going to go out there and form cults. Another good example would be the Oklahoma City bombing. Remember that? Killed 280 people. The Murrow federal office building in downtown Oklahoma City. That was done by a group of fanatical Christians. They were a group that came through a Christian belief that Aryans and Jews were evil, that believed that the only way to solve the world's problem was with the sword. Is that Christianity? No. And so Timothy McVeigh would say, well, he was following, if he followed any religious belief, that is where he would have it. And let me tell you, I'm not picking on Christians, I promise, because Muslims do the same thing. Every religion you've heard about does violence. They had extreme Hindus have murdered Muslims in India in 1948. Buddhists, can you believe this? Buddhists have killed people. I can't believe that in Myanmar. And so if you get fanatical groups wedded to a religion, it can stain the whole religion. But I would hope that you don't look at the fanatical groups that have latched onto Islam as being Islam. They're two different things. Now you might really disagree with me at this point because you've heard, and a lot of people think, that Islam supports violence. Is that true?
Doesn't Muslims follow the Muhammad life, and we follow Christ's teachings?
No, they don't really follow Muhammad's life. They don't. And they follow what he wrote down. Now see, this is where there's a difference between Islam and Christianity, is that And I would debate a little bit about what I think we follow Jesus' life too. I mean, you do. Once again, I mean, it's his, you know, when you say in the Apostles' Creed, his birth, born of the Virgin Mary, suffering under Pontius Pilate, was crucified, dead, and buried. In the Creed, we never mention Jesus' teachings at all. Not there. That's a mistake, I think. I'm speaking as a Christian real quick now. I think that's a mistake, and then the brief statement of faith tries to undo that. So, but as far as, now I'm Islamic again, Muhammad was the stenographer of God. I'm going to talk a little bit how that happened in a minute, but I do want to handle violence real quickly. Now, does Islam promote violence? And the answer to that is, I think no. But let me present the case. The standard greeting in Islam is peace be with you. And peace is a very important element in the teachings of Muhammad. Where he differed from the teachings of Jesus was that he would never allow his people to use violence except when they were attacked. There is no turn the other cheek in Islam. And so to that extent, you could say if they are attacked, they will fight back. That's correct. What about Christians? What did Jesus teach? What was his teaching? Turn the other cheek. Do good to your enemy. Do we follow that? We don't do it, and we have very careful statements. Excuse me, you don't. You just figure it out yourself. I mean, the Presbyterian Church has very clear standards called just war theory. Have you ever heard of that? It says in certain circumstances, it's okay for us to join the military and go out and fight. And we've sent many Presbyterians, as you know, some of you all are great examples of this, into the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, and there's never been a question about them violating their religious beliefs. But there are Christian groups who hold fast to the teachings of Jesus. And they're called Quakers and Mennonites. And so you see that you vary even in Christianity in what you consider situations in which you will fight. And so I think the reality on both sides is that from the religion's position, yeah, there are times when you fight back. And I don't think that varies very much. And just like Christianity, there were rules about how you fight. They're in the Quran, which is the basic document of Muslims. And that is that you do not mutilate your victims. You don't hurt the innocent. You do not destroy property. Does anybody understand maybe a little bit now where these groups are probably not Orthodox Islamist groups? Because they certainly mutilated people. They have certainly destroyed property. They have certainly fought and hurt innocent people. And that's not what the teachings of Islam are. And I expect many of y'all know Muslims in this country. Many of y'all have had contact with Muslims in this country. They're not that kind. You don't have to worry about your back when you're around them. Because why? In this country, Muslims do very well. And they're not oppressed, generally. And so they tend to have a very American approach to their religion. And so context is everything in this. Okay, yeah, thank you.
Because of all the negativity of the perception of Islam, could they be or will there ever be a reformation in the Islamic Church like the Christian Church had to separate that?
Well, you know, it's interesting. I'm not quite... This is a 500th anniversary of the Reformation, and so I'm working on the Reformation for some fall talks. And you know, the Reformation was a long-based grassroots movement. I think it didn't happen at the top. And what you see happen basically, and I don't think you can get around this, it's the economic and social conditions that allow things to happen. And I think as long as you're stuck in a situation where there is not much hope, we're not going to get any kind of reformation. You know, quite honestly, we might be close to another reformation in Christianity. I mean, we're not growing. Christians aren't growing in number. What's wrong? How can we change our own faith to make it more understandable to a modern age in America? We have real problems with that as Christians. And Islam's got the same problems. Now, they have certain drawbacks that perhaps some of us don't have. Now, I can talk about women. Does anybody want to hear about women? Real quickly?
Yes.
What is it you don't, what bothers you about the way Islam treats women?
Second class.
Second class. Who said that? Spoken like a real feminist. That's right. Now, I can only tell you from an Islamist point of view, the history. When Muhammad came to power in the 600s, he came into a country that worshipped many different gods, and there was total chaos. Drinking, gambling, there's Las Vegas everywhere. In any big city, it would be like that back table back there collecting all that money. And Muhammad set up a fairly strict rule about how people were to relate to each other. Islam tends to be stricter on promiscuity than Judaism or Christianity is by the book. But he was also very, very careful to protect women. He set up marriage contracts as being required. Before, a woman was just property. So he put up marriage contracts, and these marriage contracts are amazing in some ways, because let me just tell you a couple of the things they did. One, the woman keeps the dowry. And if she ever divorces, she gets to keep the money. That's decided before the wedding even takes place. Number two, in marriage contracts, the woman has to agree. A father and a groom can't work out all the details without her being involved there. And women have the power to divorce their husbands. Now, all of these were new ideas in 600. And he basically put these in place to give women some status. And in fact, in the history of Islam, women were generally equal to, in some areas, superior to Christian women in the rest of the world. It was only in the last 150 years that Christianity and the Western cultures have given more rights to women. Now, the two charges against Islam that you hear on this front are, number one, the burqa, and number two, the problem about polygamy. So let's look at those real quickly. The burqa is not required in Islam. And you might have Islamic friends, women, who don't wear it, and they're not required to wear it. Where it's worn is basically a cultural decision. The one country where it is most culturally demanded is Saudi Arabia, which, by the way, is not on the terrorist list. So you've got the burqa, but they see it, and they would want to see it as a way to avoid being picked on in their own country, wolf whistles and all that stuff. Maybe you ladies like that. What about polygamy? Well, Muhammad did say you can have up to 4 wives. Up to 4. But to marry them, you've got to make a couple of decisions. Could you handle 4? You know what Jimmy Durante said about this? Have you ever heard the Jimmy Durante joke? He said, a sultan of somewhere offered me his harem of 500 beautiful wives, and I turned him down. Who wants to have to stand in line that long to get in the bathroom? You can have as many as 4 wives. You can have as many as 4 wives, but you had to agree to give them exactly the same material support. So one wife could not be favored over another. And then Muhammad did a dirty thing. He said you have to have the same amount of emotional support. for each wife. Now what that did basically is ultimately end the practice of polygamy in every single Arab nation except those in Africa. Africa is where polygamy has held on, and I want to guess why? Cultural. Why is polygamy even a possibility? Where does polygamy become important to a culture?
When you need workers on the farm.
That's right. Thank you, Alma. Whenever you need more population. And so polygamy was never seen as a sin in Arab countries in the old days. It was not seen as a sin by the Jews. How many wives did Solomon have? Approached 1,000. 1,000 wives. David had what, 3, 4? And so you see, in that culture, it was always considered, probably for culture's sake, a necessity because the male population was low, and you've got to keep people pregnant if you're going to grow your population. And so and in Africa, that's been the case too. And I hate to pick on Presbyterians, but I'm going to pick on them for just a second. You know one of the great sins of our missionaries in Africa? When they went into Africa and they were converting people to Christianity, some of the Africans would come to them, particularly the chiefs, and say, I have 4 wives. Can I be a Christian? What would you say? They were telling them no. And so they would throw out 3 of the 4 wives. What did those 4 women do? They had to go on. They had to prostitute themselves or starve. In other words, it's a failure to see what culture allows. And it's interesting. Biblically, in the Old Testament, and even in the New Testament, it is not prohibited. Now, in the New Testament, it's frowned upon, but they never say you can't have more than 1 wife.
So where did it come from?
Culture.
Because if God approved it in the Old Testament, then did God change his mind?
No, God never.
I mean, you know what I'm
I
saying?
know what you're saying.
I want somebody to help me do the laundry and
Well, maybe we should bring it back.
What is all happy thing?
The guys were against it. The guys were against it.
This is no fantasy of mine.
It is it's largely a cultural decision. It's just culture. And in Africa, where there's still population issues, you're going to see it crop up more than you are going to see it crop up in other places. Now, what I'm not trying to tell you that Islam is just lily white or anything. Of course, we have our difficulties as far as violence and terrorism goes. But what I'm asking and almost pleading for is that when you hear the name Muslim or Islam, you just don't think about a bunch of harsh men who behead you and have 4 wives trailing in their train. That's not right. And I hope you have met people that have the Islamic faith that are upstanding, good citizens, and we need to respect them. And I want to talk a little bit about the religion, which I'll start.
So real quick though, the jihad thing, where you said, do you all know Muslims that are great people, you don't have to worry about it, but the point that we've all heard is that you've had these people that were your neighbors, that were wonderful people, and then they just suddenly went crazy.
They went crazy. That's right. And
As if they,
and I hope you all know this. The problem is not terrorists coming into our country. It isn't. It hasn't been a problem since 9/11. Of the 19 terrorists that ran 9/11, 18 of them were foreign terrorists. 15 of those 19 came from Saudi Arabia, which is an ally of the United States even today. But Saudi Arabia is a breeding ground for some radical Sunni politics. It's just the way it is. They're the ones that keep the burqa. They are more conservative, and so they rein in. Jihad, a holy war, is to be practiced only defensively. And again, the same rules of war apply. So if you want to fight for your religion, you've got to do it by the rules that Muhammad established. But why do the fanatics care about those fine points? They're just not going to deal with them. And so jihad has become a very kind of a catchword for radicalism. You know, the same thing existed in Judaism called Karem, C-H-E-R-E-M. Karem said you just killed everybody. When Jericho fell, Karem was practiced. They killed everybody in Jericho. The women, the children, the donkeys, the dogs, any living thing was killed in Jericho. Because that's what they thought God told them to do. But that's not in Islam, and it's certainly not in Judaism anymore. And so you just got to be aware that these terms sometimes, like holy jihad, it should be used only when the faith is attacked. And secondly, real quick, once Muhammad had a bunch of warriors come to him and say they wanted to continue jihad, and he said, no, you need to go home and practice the more important form of jihad, and that's internal. You've got to fight the holy war within yourself. Now, you know from listening to me talk that I'm kind of a fan of Muhammad, but he's not my God, and my religion is not named after him either. We are Islam, and do you know what the word Islam means? It contains the word peace, Islam, and it basically means submission, being submitted to God. And before I go any further, let me say quickly here that when they talk about Allah, A-L-L-A-H, that's Arabic for El, which is the Hebrew word. It's the same word for God. That's how close we are. And then Muhammad was interested in religion in his decadent Las Vegas type society. And he'd go up into the mountains and meditate and pray. And he found a group of people called Hanifs. And the Hanifs believed that Allah, or Yahweh, as Jews would say, was the creator God and the greatest of all gods. What Muhammad did in his revelation is that he discovered that Allah was the only God. So he was a monotheist, just like the Jews. His conversion took place when the angel Gabriel, you all know Gabriel, appeared to him and told him he needed to proclaim this new religion. And 3 times Muhammad resisted, and 3 times Gabriel subdued him with a bear hug, apparently. And so he agreed. He wasn't sure. It took him 23 years to receive this dictation from God into the Quran. Now, you Christians believe in God incarnate, right, in Jesus Christ. My faith pretty much believes that God never incarnated himself into a human being. No, God is incarnate in a book, the Quran. That's the only miracle in my faith. The Quran is direct dictation from God. Now, there would be fundamentalist Christians who would say the same thing about the Bible. And so in a way you can say that Muslims are more fundamentalistic in their desire to follow the book. The Quran means recitation. And people learn it, memorize it, and speak it. It's about 2/3 as long as the New Testament. Don't try to read it. It's a bore. I'm not saying that, isn't that honest? Your Bible is based on narrative. Mine's just a bunch of doctrines. It's hard to read. But it basically outlines the standard beliefs. Let me tell you briefly what they believe. What we believe. We believe that God spoke to Abraham. Abraham was the one that was to whom it was first revealed that God was one. And we know that Abraham, so that takes us all the way back from Adam through Abraham. We have exactly the same thing. Did you know that? Abraham, if you remember, had a son before he had Isaac with Hagar, his maid. Sarah gave him Hagar when she couldn't produce. and Hagar had a son, Ishmael. And when Sarah became pregnant and Isaac was born, she said to Abraham, I don't want that other woman around here anymore, since I've given you a son. And so Abraham sent her away. And that's the beginning of our religion, Muslim, because we believe our religion comes down from Ishmael. So we're connected. And by the way, if you run into a Muslim, they will say that Jews, Christians, and Islam are people of the book. Have you ever heard that phrase? People of the book. We all hold to the same origins of our faith. And so when Muhammad looked at what he understood from God, he could follow the chain of religion down from Abraham and even through Moses, because he saw Moses with the Ten Commandments as a basic figure of his own faith. Guess who else gets included? Jesus does. Islam understands Jesus in a way that the Jews don't. They believe two things about Jesus that Jews do not believe. One is that Jesus was a prophet sent from God, and so what he said mattered. And they revere the Sermon on the Mount. Secondly, they believe two things about Jesus' origin. Jesus was the only person other than Adam who was directly created by God. So they see a direct creation of God. Of course, you see that in Genesis. But they also see it with Jesus. And finally, they believe in the virgin birth of Jesus. And of course, Jews wouldn't believe in that. Some Christians don't feel like that's a major part of their beliefs. But I want you to see that there's always been something of a connection between the two religions. Okay? Now, my time is almost up. And I do want to talk a little bit about some of their practices, because you might have some questions on that. And I'll be happy to answer. It's 10, 14, and 30 seconds. And, but I'm going to keep you just a couple of minutes over to see if there are any pressing questions. But I've got some good news for you. I'm going to be really schizophrenic next week. Next Sunday is my final Sunday. And I've asked all the former speakers not to come, but to send me a little list of something that they wish they had said and didn't have time to. So I'll go look through those fairly quickly. And then I want to talk to you all about what Christians think about all these religions and what Christianity has to say on issues like that we've talked about. Anything about the Islamic religion itself, I'm sorry, but I wanted to talk about that terrorist stuff, so I'm happy about that. But, yes, sir.
How about during the Dark Ages?
I'm sorry?
What did the Muslims did during the Dark Ages?
Yeah, thank you. Islam did several things during the Dark Ages in the West, where all the Greek philosophy was, nobody copying books. Islam preserved the Greek writings, the ancient writings. We would not know Aristotle at all. Aristotle would have been totally lost, for good or bad, depending on whether you like Aristotle, if it hadn't been for Muslims who kept it. Because they believe the world is a place where scientific discovery can take place, some of the great astronomers were Islamic. They have a high regard for science, and so they maintained science and philosophy during all the years that the West was in its dark ages. And one more thing, as I said earlier, I've been working a little bit on the Reformation. I like the Reformation question, by the way. I appreciated that. Muslims say the Protestant Reformation maybe. Do you know when Martin Luther put those 95 Theses up on the wall, why didn't the Roman Catholics come down and cream him? They'd done it 100 years before. They put poor John Huss to the stake. But they couldn't get Luther. And the reason is, every time they would get close, those darn Muslims would start attacking Vienna again. And the authorities thought that the Muslim threat was greater than the Protestant threat. And it's on at least 3 different occasions when Protestantism could have been wiped out in Europe, all the Roman Catholics headed east to fight the Muslim invasion in Austria. So, a little side note. Anything else? Will you please all go in peace? It's been a pleasure. If you have any questions you want to ask me up close and personal, don't be afraid. And I'll look forward to seeing you all next week.